Hey Drifters, I guess this is gonna have to be my first voiceover video, and I'm doing this so that you guys have an easy and simple step-by-step guide on how to properly install and utilize this Parkour mod. Especially because I've seen a lot of you haven't properly read the mod description, which also contains the installation and usage guide in text form. And instead of constantly redirecting you guys there, I just decided to make a bit of a simple step-by-step guide so that everyone has it a bit easier. So for the mod to work, we need two things. We need Cheat Engine and the mod itself. Now, Cheat Engine is just the program that the mod uses in order to achieve its own functionality by peering into the game's memory and doing different things with different values to make everything work. And in this case, we're also going to be downloading the Brotherhood Parkour mod. Now, this doesn't matter. You can choose any of the games that the mods are made for, and the installation and usage process is the exact same, except for one exception that applies to AC1 and AC2 during installation, but we'll get into that later. So in order to actually download it, we're going to click on this big, very not suspicious green download button. I really don't know why the site looks so sketchy, but it is what it is. You don't have to worry about it. It's fine. It's safe. It works. There we go. We're simply going to download this. So once you've downloaded Cheat Engine, you're going to have to install it. Now the installation process is pretty simple, and I'm not going to go through it simply because I already have it installed. The only thing is that depending on your antivirus, Cheat Engine might get false flagged because of the way it works. Now you don't have to worry about it. It's safe, it's completely fine, and the only thing you have to do is just temporarily disable your antivirus while you're installing Cheat Engine. When it's done installing, you can simply turn it back on and everything's fine. After having installed Cheat Engine, we're going to be moving on to the mod itself. When you actually reach the mod page, I would first recommend everyone read the feature list in here, simply so you know what you're actually getting into. There's a lot of features, and you don't have to start by using all of them. You don't ever have to use all of them, but it's just really good to know what the mod provides and what sorts of movement variations and different moves are actually contained within it. One thing I want to add before we move on is that if you want to run this on AC1 or AC2, you're also going to need to have Eagle Patch installed on them, and this is listed in Henry's installation guide here in text form as well. Now, I'm not going to do a full-on tutorial on how to install it because Henry already links Eagle Patch for each respective game inside of here, so you can just open it in a new tab and follow these relatively simple install instructions, and once you're done you can just continue with my tutorial and everything's gonna work fine. Same thing for AC2, Eagle Patch is here, you can open it up, and there we go. After checking out the description page and the list of functionality that the mod provides, we're going to move on to the Files tab. This is where the downloads are located, and this is the two versions of the mod that we actually care about, and it's the same mod just made either for controller binds or keyboard and mouse binds. So you're going to choose the one that you actually use. I use controller, so I'm going to click on manual download for the controller keybinds. And there we go, it's downloaded. After downloading the mod, we're just going to have to extract it. Now you can use anything to do it as it's in a zipped file format, but I'm just going to do it within Windows itself. We're going to click on Extract All, we're going to extract it into this location. And where you actually extract and locate this mod on your computer doesn't matter, it's going to work either way, so you don't have to worry about that. Now, to actually use the mod, the first step would be to have both the mod and the game running. And in this case, the mod is done in such a way where it automatically looks for the game's process, so you don't have to manually hook anything, and whether you have the mod or the game open first doesn't really matter. So now, for example, I'm going to firstly open up the mod here. You're going to have to click on yes on the administrator prompt, and then we're going to click on yes on this execute this Lua script window. This is going to open up the mod window. Once it's open, you don't have to touch it anymore. Next up, I'm going to open up the game, and as I said, you don't necessarily have to have the mod open before the game. This specific order doesn't matter. So once you've opened the game, before you actually enable the mod, you're going to just have to load up your save. So we're going to click on one of the saves, and we're going to wait for the world to load up. So now that we're loaded up into the game's world and roaming around, it's finally safe to enable the mod. Now, to enable the mod, you don't actually have to go to the Cheat Engine window. In fact, you're not supposed to touch the Cheat Engine window whatsoever. Instead, you enable the mod by pressing D-pad up on controller, or whatever the respective bind is on keyboard and mouse. I happen not to know it since I haven't really played around with that version. Once the mod is enabled, then all of the parkour functionality that the mod actually provides is available to you. The only thing is that while you're actually parkouring and using the mod's features, it's always preferable to turn its parkour mode on. And you turn parkour mode on by pressing R3 or right stick on controller, or whatever the respective keybind is on keyboard and mouse. So essentially what parkour mode does is that it disables certain features in game that are bound to certain keybinds or controller binds so that you can actually free those buttons up for different parkour actions. So for example, it disables enemy and NPC lock-on, which is usually L2 on controller, so that you can utilize L2 without accidentally doing any locking on, any air tackling, if anything of the sort. It also disables L1 for the games which actually contain a calling in assassins button, so you don't accidentally call any assassins in or any recruits in when you're just trying to, for example, parkour down. It also disables R1, which is the weapon wheel bind, so that you can use hang related binds while holding the button without actually, opening the weapon wheel up. And on top of that, it also disables the empty hand related functions, which are just different attacks, so that you can use different vault functionality without actually triggering any punches or anything of the sort. So, if you're trying to parkour around and there's an enemy nearby, you don't accidentally assassinate them, you don't accidentally kill them, or you don't accidentally draw your weapon and start swinging it around instead of vaulting over an object. The way that most of this parkour mod really works is that it applies modifiers to existing parkour moves and inputs that you give to the game. So for example, this jump here when vanilla is just going to end up making Ezio land on the other side of the street on the edge of the rooftop, and of course he's landing with his feet. But what if you want to, for example, force Ezio to land with a hang? Then you can simply hold the force hang button and do that same jump, and as you can see, he's going to target the ledge under it. Now this ledge is a bit of a peculiar type, so he went like one handhold below it, but usually most ledges are going to target with a hang wherever he would usually land with his feet. And as you can see, he listened and did the input. If you, for example, want to trigger a dive beam, you can also hold L1 and R1 at the same time, and then again execute that same jump, and as you can see, Ezio is actually going to again listen and swing off. One such example of modifying existing parkour features with the mod is the vault. Even though the vault looks like a standalone specific move, it's actually sort of counted as a jump variation. So if you want to execute the vault, you're going to have to hold the vault button while executing a normal jump. So for example, if I want to execute a vault over that sign over there, I'm going to hold the vault button, execute that jump, and as you can see, Ezio naturally vaults over it. Vaults are in a way kind of peculiar simply because they have a different set of stages on how they work. A simple jump, for example, has a start and an end point, and once you're at the end point, it's over. You can chain it into something else, you can make it lead into something else. But in the case of vaults, they have different possible outcomes that you can influence in the middle of their execution. So if I'm going to execute this vault that you saw manage to land onto that beam down there, and if I instead just hold the vault button while vaulting, Ezio is going to force a vault to hang. This means that with the mod, you have full control over whether the vault actually targets a hang or targets a standing position if a standing position is available. If there's like way too high of a vault destination for the vault to actually complete and you just let go, then Ezio is going to naturally hang. Another thing that you can do is use existing parkour modifiers such as parkour down to influence what the vault targets for. So in this case where Ezio was actually hanging, I can simply hold parkour down in the middle of the vault and he's going to target that bottom part of the sledge from the inside. Another such example of modifying the actual vault in the middle of its execution is holding the freeform button. Now, the freeform button is basically a bind that forces Ezio to not really target anything with his contextual moves. So you can choose to, instead of landing this eject here onto his feet, you can instead choose to basically, if I can get myself up to here, if I hold freeform, you can choose to simply have him not target for anything. And this also applies to vaults. So if I hold the freeform button in the middle of vaulting, he's simply going to vault straight down and not target anything. This is really useful for direct descents or if you want to catch something after it, especially since for some reason, I don't know why the game does it this way, but when you actually do the freeform vault and you start falling, the fall is very quick, so you can easily accumulate fall damage. So it's just good practice to usually grab something on the side. On top of being able to trigger a vault from a jump, you can also trigger it from a hang, and it works something like this. If I were to hang off of this sign here, or any sort of ledge or hangable object, and I hold vault while trying to pull myself up and climb on top of it, Ezio actually vaults over it, which in my opinion is a good usage of hang to vault. It makes sense because even though Ezio has a very quick height gain, he doesn't fully get his body on top of it with his legs, rather he sort of slides over it. And I think it's a worth it and balanced sort of trade-off for being able to gain height so quickly, mostly because it lets you gain a lot of height in a very short amount of time, but later balances it out with the height loss that you can induce. That doesn't mean that this vault is useless. You can, for example, use it with a freeform landing in the middle of it, like showcased before, to grab something on the side and potentially eject off. So it's a pretty good mistake correction tool if you accidentally hang over something. However, I believe that problems arise once you try to use the vault from a hang off of a ledge of this type. Again, it works in the same way, so you can hold vault while trying to climb up, but as you can see, Ezio gains way too much horizontal travel and way too much vertical momentum in too little time. Despite the slow pull-up in the vanilla game, I do believe that it has a good purpose and a good reason to exist, and is still quite quick by general standards. So I do believe that using the vault in this sort of case isn't really justified, and while it looks relatively okay, it's not exactly grounded for what Ezio can do within his own moveset. An even worse offender of this is vaulting on top of these sorts of objects where Ezio just does a free hang. In my opinion, doing this is basically inexcusable in any sort of case. While I could potentially understand someone trying to do a vault onto a standing surface from a hanging position where Ezio has his legs planted onto a wall, I don't really see any use case where this sort of vault is actually grounded or excusable. It's simply that the way that hang to vault works has to have this enabled, because there is no real way of disabling it when Ezio is in this state, and it requires a good bit of self-limitation. If I do see a run doing something along the lines of this, or climbing on top of a roof overhang, for example, this way, I don't really see the value in that, because that goes against the deliberate restrictions that are put onto level design by using overhangs in different geometry in order to make you think, in order to make you use proper eject optimization and proper pathing. This is just a bit of a cheat, and I really don't think it's okay to use it. So basically, if you ever do use this, I will find you. With how this mod actually sorts its keybinds out and has this certain logic that it follows that you've probably noticed, it's also sometimes possible to combine different modifiers into one unique move. So, in this case, for example, if I do a vanilla jump over to there, Ezio is going to target the further beam. But if I instead do a parkour down jump, Ezio is going to target the closest beam, which is something you would expect of parkour down. As well as if I just simply hold freeform parkour into that direction, as you can see, Ezio didn't target anything and just decided to not go for anything until I grabbed something. So if I make my way to the sign while holding freeform parkour down when jumping off of it, as you can see, Ezio did both a freeform jump and a parkour down jump in one move. And this logic applies to several other things as well as several other contexts. So for example, if you're doing a swing off of a beam or a swing or a platform, whatever lets you do it, in fact, you can simply hold parkour down to target downwards, you can hold freeform to target freeform, aka to not target anything, or you can hold freeform parkour down to do a freeform parkour down move in the same fashion. On top of the previously showcased parkour down close feature, which allows you to target a lower destination if there's two possible heights of landing destinations available, as you can see I just chose the parkour down destination here. There's also a different variation of the parkour down feature, and it's called parkour down far. And parkour down far, as the name suggests, targets further away but still lower landing destinations and results in larger leaps. So if I properly target this, I can completely skip one of those jumps from all the way up there and use a parkour down far to land down to here. The reason for me getting into this is that there's cases in which parkour down isn't actually going to execute a parkour down feature. As you can see here, if I hold parkour down close and I'm simply targeting the far beam, he doesn't actually go down. Why is so? Well, the actual answer to that is the fact that this beam, the stop landing destination, is horizontally closer to the starting position than the one below Ezio. And in those cases, you can't filter out the bottom parkour destination by using parkour down close. What you do instead is use exactly parkour down far. So if we go to here and then we hold parkour down far, as you can see, Ezio targets lower down. So sadly, due to how the game works, due to how the game targets different positions, and because of what all the mod can do, considering the fact that it basically tries its best to poke at different values in memory, it's not always possible to fully introduce a feature that is going to have infallible priority selection. But for what it is, Parkour Down Close does still function basically perfectly and is going to be fine for like 99% of your jumps. But just keep in mind that if this sort of targeting doesn't happen properly, try Parkour Down Far and look at the geometry and it might be fine. The reason I mentioned the Parkour mod mostly modifying existing game moves with its own functionalities because there's a couple of exceptions to its feature set. Some of them are passive, which means that they're constantly running in the background the moment you activate the mod, and some of them are active where you don't necessarily need to be executing a jump, eject, swing, or vault to apply their functionality. One of the examples of this passive functionality that constantly runs in the background is something you've probably noticed either by watching this video or by watching my recent choreo or showcase montage video, and is that Ezio has been stumbling a lot less. Basically, the Ezio games after AC1 introduced this feature, or rather a very big problem if you ask me, where Ezio constantly stumbles on landings of a certain angle. And what this mod does is that it finds a way to completely remove this and just have Ezio basically normally target different jumps. Now the thing is, it still retains that AC1 stumble where if you barely make it to a landing destination from a freeform state, you know, the character kind of almost falls off and catches themselves with their knee and then pulls themselves up. But that stumble, unlike the angle-based one, actually makes sense and doesn't break that much flow, while the one with Ezio would constantly be getting in the way and you would have to be setting jumps up to either be near perpendicular or almost run alongside the ledge that you're landing on. And now you don't have to worry about that anymore. Another example of a passive function that this mod provides is the ability to swing. So, as you've noticed, I was able to both swing on beams and different platforms and anything that gives Ezio enough space to actually swing off. But you don't really need to press any button or any input in order to actually force the swing to happen. So all that dive beam and force to hang does is that it makes Ezio target the object with his hands, but if I, for example, cancel into an eject early on this specific platform up here, and Ezio grabs it, he's gonna swing off without me holding any modifiers. And this just works across the board, so you can, you can jump into a beam that's in front of you that you wouldn't be able to land on with your feet without holding anything, and you can swing off of it normally. The last example of passive functionality that this mod provides is the ability to cancel into an eject after any ledge grab that has Ezio land his feet onto the wall. So this means that it works from a prescriptive grab, it works from a freeform grab that you just manually do from midair, and it works all across the board. So if I were to jump into this window and do a freeform eject down and then eject back up to where I was, those were both ledge grabs that let Ezio land onto the wall with his feet while still holding onto a ledge. Now previously what we had to do with vanilla movement was basically manually jumping into different surfaces in order to induce this sort of grab, where Ezio lands his feet onto a foothold as well, that usually is just a handhold. But now you don't have to hunt for these contexts anymore. This now means that you can do things like this, where Ezio instantly rebounds from a wall grab that used to be far slower before the mod, and you can now simply do them without necessarily having to hunt for contexts which allow for the perfect grab, which is what we used to call the grab that has both handholds and footholds. Because of how this works, it also makes the ledge pull-up cooldown a bit faster. So if I were to jump into this ledge and attempt to pull up, you'll see that Ezio does it far faster and doesn't really have as long of a cooldown time. That's because it's the same cooldown that gets nullified in this process. That also means that you can do this faster, but if I see you doing this, again, I will find you. On the other hand, there is one example of active functionality that doesn't constantly run in the background, but also doesn't require you to be performing any sort of existing jump, eject, swing, vault, whatever, and that is the natural beam drop. So the natural beam drop is actuated in the same way as freeform parkour down, but instead of actually executing a jump alongside it, you only hold the two modifiers, and it looks something like this. You land on a beam, you hold it, and Ezio descends. As you can see, the beam drop looks very similar to freeform parkour down, but it also looks a bit better and a bit smoother. The reason this move is called a beam drop is because it's only available in non-standing states, and most of your non-standing states are going to be spent on NSOs, most of which are beams. But it's also possible to do on non-standing objects of different types, such as signposts or that white wall over there. One exception to this is the fact that you can also do it from a non-standing state of a jump landing, because it's a similar state to being perched on a beam. So if I were to jump onto this rooftop here and then hold beam drop backwards, Ezio actually executes it. The beam drop also has an angular restriction, which means that if you're standing on top of a beam that you wish to descend from, and you want to do it at an angle that faces quite a bit further away from where Ezio is facing, or the opposite of that, you can't exactly execute it. You can only try to push it to a certain extent, but if you try to do it way too much inwards, then Ezio is simply going to turn inwards on his beam and start jogging down it. And that brings me to another issue that the beam drop has, and that is the fact that Ezio cannot possibly execute the beam drop if he's actually facing down alongside an NSO, which means that even if I'm putting my directional input outwards to the side, I have to wait for Ezio to turn in order to actually execute it. This does mean that the beam drop is oftentimes slower, especially in certain contexts, and it kind of means that you also have to carefully juggle between the properties of the beam drop itself and freeform parkour down. If you can afford the beam drop, if you really need it to reach something that's very far down, if you really need that strong downwards bias, if you want it to look a bit prettier than freeform parkour down, then go for it. But there's going to be a good few cases where it's just more reliable and easier to use freeform parkour down due to that angular freedom and the different contexts in which it lets you use it. Lastly, we're going to talk about safeguarded features. Safeguarded features are these green-coded features in the mod that you can see once you actually turn the mod on with D-pad up. And the reason they're safeguarded, which means that their binds are disabled by default, is because they can often produce results that are unrealistic for Ezio's inherent sort of rule set and can sometimes be overly volatile. These features are swing up, vault landing far, super hop, and manual force flip. Again, this means that these features, in order to retain a sort of grounding and physical consistency with Ezio, need a lot of self-limitation. You can't just keep them on and use them. You can't always, execute them whenever you wish to if you want things to look right and if you want them to look relatively tangible according to what Ezio should be able to do. And I truly don't want to see any parkour runs or choreographies that take and basically abuse these features. I think that would be very wrong and would go against the game's original intent with movement and what this mod also tries to achieve. So in order to activate these additional features, if you really wish to do so, firstly, you do not click on the specific entries checkmarks. This would mean that they're constantly active and constantly running, which means that you would get each of their results just constantly appearing in gameplay. Instead, what we're going to do is activate their keybinds by right-clicking here on the specific entry, going to set/change hotkeys, and then enabling the different hotkeys for every single one of them. So like so, and then this one's going to have a couple as well, and the same thing for the last one. And after we're done doing this, like so, that means that we were actually done enabling them. The base function of the super hop is allowing Ezio to land prescriptively onto different handholds and objects that wouldn't otherwise let him land on them. So for example, this handhold there actually looks pretty wide, and you can kind of imagine that Ezio should maybe be able to land on it with his feet, only temporarily. And that's exactly what happens. So I can either land on it and wall run up, or if I do a bit of an eject back down there and get back to the thing, if I don't do anything, Ezio lands on it but then actually falls off. And that's one grounded use case of the super hop. Another use for the super hop is also landing onto swings with your feet. So as you just saw, Ezio was actually able to land onto that swing with his feet and then jump off normally. Of course, if you attempt to actually sit on the swing, then it's going to fall off just how it did with a handhold. Another niche utility of the super hop is being able to put more priority onto a ledge from the inner side that happens to be closer to you. So since Ezio doesn't really have a super hop target that's in any sort of range anywhere in front of that ledge, if I try to jump with super hop here, Ezio is going to target this ledge here. So sometimes you can use this to, for example, set up the aforementioned natural beam drop and actually drop from a ledge that you forced that landing on. With the same binds as super hop, you can also actuate vaults over obstacles that are usually way too high for the vanilla vault to work, something along the lines of this. But as you probably noticed, that also looks potentially a bit way too strong for what Ezio should be able to achieve, and also actively gets in the way of optimization using ejects. The thing is that the super hop by itself, even without the vault, can also produce such results, and this is exactly why it's safeguarded. Sometimes its handhold targeting, as shown in this case as well, is not always the most grounded. It often gets in the way of Ezio's inherent sort of physical rule set that keeps the parkour system in line and keeps it consistent and makes it retain the importance of eject optimization, because it breaks its own physics. Even though vanilla movement isn't inherently realistic, it works according to a set of rules and restrictions that make sure that the game has a lot of freedom, but also gives you a bit of a challenge, gives you a reason to use its vast moveset to actually move around. And the super hop can often break this grounding, either by, targeting way too high as we just saw, or potentially landing Ezio on handholds that aren't necessarily the most fit for actual foot landings. And you don't always want to break grounding this way. Next on the list of safeguarded features, we have the swing up. And the swing up is pretty straightforward. If I do a dive beam into this beam next to me and hold swing up while swinging off of it, as you can see, Ezio managed to actually find a foot landing from a swing onto a destination that's higher than the swing itself. Now, why is this safeguarded? It's safeguarded because you can execute this swing up from any sort of jump entry rather than swing entry. And the problem is you can often start it from positions that make Ezio look like he really didn't accumulate enough entry speed to later transform it into a landing of such height. So if I try to do the swing up from here, it doesn't really make sense that Ezio could have gathered up enough speed to get up onto that beam that quickly. This is why I think it's best to use swing up after a relatively long and large dive beam such as this one, where Ezio obviously accumulates a lot of downward speed and then later manages to transform it into upwards velocity, which is something that's more physically tangible for him. Next up on the list of safeguarded features, we have the manual horse flip. So as a lot of you might know, in AC Brotherhood, when you jump off of a horse into an NSO, you can get one of two different flip animations. One of them is the flip that lets you flip backwards onto the same NSO that you're swinging off from, and the other one is one that lets you swing further out and onto the next landing target. In order to execute the self-flipping variation of the horse flip, you need to be in the middle of a swing that has been entered into from either a jump or an eject, anything that gives Ezio some momentum. And to do it, you simply have to hold L2 on controller, which is the super hop bind, while he's in the middle of the swing, and you hold it without holding anything else, so you don't hold high profile legs or any directional input, and Ezio is going to swing right back onto the NSO he started from. In order to complete the horse flip that gets you further away, that targets the landing destination beyond the one you're swinging from, you have to do the same thing in the middle of the swing, but also hold forward. So if I do this and hold forward while holding L2 only, he can land up to here. The reason the horse flip is safeguarded is mainly because of its second variation, the one that flips you over to the next landing target. That is because, as you can see, it functions as a swing up, and not only that, but it only works if you're swinging to a higher target, a higher landing destination, which means that you kind of have to apply the same sort of limitation to it that you do to swing up. And again, this is why I think it's best to actually complete the horse flip if you're swinging up from a larger dive. So basically, as I said, the same rules that applies as with swing up, at least by my book. Like so. And it's also worth noting that this also works in Revelations, so it only works in Revelations and Brotherhood. And finally we come to the last safeguarded feature, and that is the vault landing far. So vault landing far basically refers to utilizing L2, which is also the super hop bind, in the middle of the vault like we have with the freeform vault or the parkour down vault. And what it does is that it ensures that the vault targets a further landing destination. So here a normal vault isn't going to be able to land Ezio onto the object there, but because of the the placement of the landing destination that we kind of want him to reach, it looks relatively tangible, and you can achieve this by holding L2 in the middle of a vault. And this is one of the cases where it looks good. The reason this feature was safeguarded is because you can sometimes get vault landings that just hit way too far and essentially equate to a jump's distance. So for example, if I hold vault landing far here, Ezio kind of pushes himself off of that object and gains some vertical momentum that he couldn't have really gotten with his hands only. And so we finally have come to an end. I didn't initially intend for this video to be as much of a guide-oriented thing. Initially it was supposed to be a bit more of a just step-by-step tutorial on how to install things, how to just activate the mod. But I really wanted to come across with my point of why some features are safeguarded, why it's really important to still take good care of the physical limitations that are imposed onto Ezio for a reason, and on Altair if you're playing AC1, and also why it's so crucial to uphold the very basis of the systems that this mod complements, because at the end of the day, this mod isn't AC Brotherhood fixes, it's not AC2 fixes, it is a mod that makes a system that was already, in my opinion, the best movement system in AC, if not in the entirety of gaming, and turns it into something even better. And that's why it's important to cherish whatever made the system good to begin with.